The sirens were off, but the city still felt loud. It was past midnight when the unmarked SUVs turned the corner and stopped a block away from the old brick warehouse on the west side. The street was almost empty, only the distant rumble of a freight train and the constant hum of the freeway hanging in the air. Agent Daniel Cole rested his hand on the thick fur at the back of Rex's neck, feeling the dog's steady breathing against the tension in his own chest. Rex was a large German shepherd, older than most dogs still on duty, with grey around the muzzle and scars hidden under his coat. He sat quietly in the back seat, eyes fixed on the warehouse as if he already knew what waited inside. Daniel had learned long ago to trust that stare. The dog had saved his life twice, once in a dark alley, once in a stairwell where a door should have been locked and wasn't. "Target is inside, second floor, corner office," the team leader said over the radio, voice flat and professional. "No confirmed civilians. We go in quiet, we come out fast." For months, the same name had been written across whiteboards and case files: Vincent Moretti. To the city, he was a construction magnate and philanthropist with his face in charity photos. To the agency, he was the man behind drug routes, extortion rings, and disappearances that never reached the news. Tonight was supposed to be the night it all became official. Arrest, charges, press conference, a clean line on a report. Daniel tightened Rex's harness, checking each buckle by touch. The familiar routine almost enough to calm him. "Stay close, partner," he murmured. The dog flicked an ear back in acknowledgement, then focused on the warehouse again. There was something in that stare Daniel couldn't read. Not fear, not excitement. Something heavier. The team moved in a tight formation along the sidewalk, keeping to the shadows. Two agents forced the side door with practiced efficiency. The smell inside hit them first. Old oil, damp concrete, dust. Rex's nose twitched rapidly, his body shifting from calm to fully engaged in a single breath. Daniel felt the leash grow taut as the dog pulled forward, methodical, following an invisible trail only he could sense. They cleared the first floor in silence. Empty offices, overturned chairs, stacked boxes, the hollow shell of a business that had probably never been real. On the stairwell, Rex paused for half a second, then chose the steps to the right, ears pointed, muscles tight. Daniel followed, trusting the dog's instinct more than the intelligence map he had studied hours earlier. At the top of the stairs, a thin strip of light glowed under a single door at the end of the corridor. Two agents took position on each side, weapons ready. Daniel tightened his grip on Rex's leash, feeling the dog's body vibrate with tension. The team leader counted silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. The door burst open in a blur of movement, and for a moment everything happened at once. Inside, a man in his 50s rose slowly from behind a metal desk, his hands already raised, as if he had been waiting. The crisp shirt, the expensive watch, the composed eyes left no doubt who he was. Vincent Moretti did not look surprised. He looked prepared. Agents shouted commands, spreading through the office, checking corners, opening inner doors. No other men, no weapons on the table, no attempt to run. Daniel stayed by the entrance with Rex, covering the room. That was when the dog's body changed. The tail stiffened, the fur along his spine lifted like a wave. Then Rex saw the man's face. The reaction was instant and violent. Rex lunged forward, a deep guttural bark exploding from his chest and bouncing off the narrow walls. Daniel yanked the leash back, startled. The dog wasn't just alert, he was enraged. The barking grew louder, more desperate, every sound loaded with something that felt far beyond simple training. "Control your dog," one of the agents snapped, eyes never leaving Moretti. "I've got him," Daniel replied, but the certainty was missing from his voice. He had seen Rex confront armed suspects, stand firm under direct threat. This was different. There was no gun, no sudden movement. Just a man standing with his hands up and a dog acting as if it had come face to face with something rotten at the core. Moretti turned his head slowly and looked directly at Rex. For a brief, heavy moment, the boss and the dog held each other's gaze. A small, almost invisible smile touched the corner of Moretti's mouth. It wasn't fear. It wasn't bravado. It looked disturbingly close to recognition. "What's wrong with your animal, Agent?" Moretti asked, voice calm, accent softened by years of careful presentation. "He doesn't like successful businessmen." Rex's barking intensified, the sound rougher now, bordering on a growl forced through his throat as he strained against the leash. Daniel stepped slightly in front of the dog, placing his body between Rex and the suspect, but that only seemed to fuel the animal's frustration. The air in the room shifted. An operation planned to be fast and clean now revolved around a dog that refused to accept the scene for what it appeared to be. "Cole, take the dog outside," the team leader ordered. "He's throwing everyone off." Daniel hesitated. Protocol said, "Obey." Years beside Rex said, "Wait." The dog had never lost control without a reason, never fixated on anyone like this. Daniel swept the room quickly with his eyes, searching for any logical explanation. Hidden weapon, second exit, someone behind a door. Nothing. Rex dug his claws into the floor, barking and growling as Moretti adjusted his stance by a fraction. The sound made a younger agent flinch. Moretti noticed, measuring the reaction with the cold precision of a man who had spent a lifetime cataloguing people's weaknesses. "Easy, Rex," Daniel whispered, barely audible over the barking. "What are you seeing that I'm not?" There was no answer, just the dog's fixed stare and rapid breathing, trapped between training and instinct. Finally, Daniel gave in to the order. He pulled Rex toward the hallway, one step at a time, the dog resisting until the last possible moment, barking until the door closed between them and the mob boss. In the corridor the sound dulled, but Rex's chest still rose and fell as if he had just sprinted a long distance. Daniel knelt beside him, shortening the leash, trying to calm his partner. The dog's eyes never left the door, ears tuned to every muffled word from inside. Inside the office, the team read rights, applied cuffs, and followed procedure. On paper, the case was closing exactly the way it was supposed to. In the hallway, an experienced police dog remained restless, as if he knew that something fundamental was wrong with the perfect arrest unfolding a few meters away. Daniel glanced once more at the closed door, listening to the distant, formal words that would mark the official end of a long investigation. Rex still growled softly, a low, persistent sound that felt less like aggression and more like a warning. Whatever was really going on in that room, the dog was certain of one thing long before the agent was. This was not an ending. It was the first sign that for the truth behind Vincent Moretti, it was already too late. The holding room felt smaller than it was. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, turning every surface a shade of pale grey. Behind the one-way glass, Agent Daniel Cole stood with a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hand, watching Vincent Moretti sit handcuffed at the metal table. The mob boss rested his fingers lightly on the tabletop, as if he were seated in a conference room, waiting for a meeting to start. Rex wasn't allowed inside the observation area, but Daniel could still feel the echo of the dog's reaction in his own body. Hours had passed since the arrest, yet the image of Rex lunging and barking refused to fade. The dog had ridden back in a separate vehicle, pacing and whining until they reached the kennel at the field office. Even there, handlers had reported he took longer than usual to settle. On the other side of the glass, Moretti glanced up, eyes wandering slowly across the mirror as if he knew exactly where Daniel was standing. The faintest hint of a smirk crossed his face before he looked away again. It was enough to stir the same unease that had followed Daniel from the warehouse. "Paperwork says you finally got your guy," a voice said behind him. Daniel turned. Special agent in charge. Morgan Hayes stood in the doorway, tie loosened, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Hayes had the look of a man who lived at the office and only visited his own house on weekends. He stepped in, joined Daniel at the glass, and studied Moretti with the tired focus of someone who had waited years for this view. "Yeah," Daniel answered. "That's what the paperwork says. But you're not celebrating." Hayes took a sip from his own coffee, never taking his eyes off the suspect. "Something wrong with the arrest. We're clean on the warrant, the intel, the operation. Internal Affairs already sent a congratulations text." "The arrest is clean," Daniel said. "Rex isn't." "Your dog?" Hayes frowned. "He lost control." "Not like that," Daniel replied. "He reacted to Moretti the second he saw him. I've never seen him do that without an immediate threat." Hayes shrugged. "Maybe he smelled something on the guy. Drugs, blood, whatever. Dogs are dramatic. That's why we use them." Daniel let the comment hang. Maybe Hayes was right. Maybe Rex had picked up a scent from some old crime clinging to Moretti's clothes. Or maybe the dog sensed something else neither of them could name. Whatever it was, the reaction refused to line up with the neat framed picture everyone wanted tonight. "I'll start the first round of questions in 20, Hayes said, straightening his sleeves. "Take a break. You look like you slept in the car." "I did," Daniel answered. "Try a chair next time," Hayes said, already turning to leave. "You can bring your dog to the press conference tomorrow. People love that." When the door closed, Daniel remained at the glass a moment longer, then set the untouched coffee down and walked out. The hallway outside the observation room was lined with framed commendations and photographs of successful operations. Smiling agents, confiscated drugs and weapons on tables, headlines framed as trophies, the kind of history that said the system worked. He headed instead to the file room. The case against Vincent Moretti filled 2 shelves, boxes labeled with dates, operation codes, and the names of the agents who had come and gone over the years. Daniel pulled the most recent box first, then hesitated and grabbed one from 5 years earlier. He carried them to an empty table, sat, and started reading. Reports, surveillance logs, financial analyses, witness statements with half the lines blacked out. Everything fit a familiar pattern. A patient, methodical build-up leading to a carefully authorized strike. On the surface, it was textbook work, but the more pages Daniel turned, the more small inconsistencies began to push through the lines. A witness who had been relocated suddenly stopped appearing in follow-up notes, with no explanation of a new address. A confidential informant's coded number appeared in 3 different formats across 2 years of reports, as if someone had changed the key midstream. Timestamps on surveillance photos didn't quite match the patrol logs from the same nights. Most people would have skimmed past all that, trusting that if anything was truly wrong, someone above their pay grade would have caught it. Daniel wasn't most people. Long nights and long cases had trained him to see the places where reality and paperwork failed to match. He turned to a series of old crime scene photos from a warehouse across town. Weapons on the floor, empty crates, a bloodstain beside a loading bay door. The narrative summary said the suspect had fled before arrest. The case was later marked as folded into ongoing racketeering investigation. The ongoing investigation, he realized now, was the one that had led to Moretti. Rex had been there that night. Younger, faster, with less grey in his fur. The dog's presence was clear in the handwritten notes. K9 indicated near door. K9 agitated by unknown scent. K9 redirected by handler. Daniel remembered the case. He remembered the feeling that they had arrived minutes too late, as if the whole scene had been swept and staged just before the sirens came around the corner. He had chalked it up to frustration. Now, as he looked at the timestamp and compared it to dispatch logs on another page, something else bothered him. The call that sent them to that warehouse had come from an anonymous number. The audio transcript was short, urgent. A male voice, altered by some kind of distortion, giving an address and saying, "You're 5 minutes from saving a life." By the time they arrived, there was no one to save, only the echo of violence and the smell that had set Rex on edge for half the night. The anonymous caller's number was never tied to a name. Attempts to trace it had hit a technical dead end. The file moved on. Resources were shifted. The crime scene joined a long list of unsolved links in a chain that finally ended, officially, with Vincent Moretti in handcuffs. Daniel closed the folder and rubbed his eyes. One inconsistency could be an oversight. Two could be coincidence. A pattern of them was something else. He pulled the most recent digital report on his tablet, scrolling through the final operation plan. The document was polished, signed off at multiple levels, thoroughly reviewed. Buried in the authorization section was a detail he hadn't noticed before. The timeline for action had been accelerated 3 days ahead of the original schedule, per directive from headquarters. 3 days, enough time to move money, erase certain files, shift personnel, enough time for someone who knew about the raid to prepare a version of the truth they were willing to let the world see. The door to the file room creaked open. Agent Lisa Monroe stepped inside, a folder tucked under her arm. She was part of the Financial Crimes Unit, the one who had first drawn the clear line between Moretti's legitimate businesses and the shell companies that laundered his income. "You're still buried in this?" she asked. "I thought you'd be in the viewing room, enjoying the show." "Just checking something," Daniel said. "Do you remember who pushed the operation date forward?" "Not exactly," Lisa replied, leaning against the table. "Came down from above. Coordination with other ongoing priorities, or some phrase like that. Why?" "Because 3 days before the raid, half of Moretti's shell companies were dissolved on paper," Daniel said, "and nobody flagged it." Lisa frowned. "You're sure?" He turned the tablet so she could see the corporate registry data he'd pulled earlier in the week. Multiple entities shut down, assets redistributed on paper to holding firms with clean records. The sequence looked less like panic and more like a controlled transfer, the kind of move someone makes when they know exactly how long they have. "It's like someone gave him a countdown," Daniel said. "Not enough time to run, just enough time to clean up." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't make sense. If someone inside was helping him, why let us take him at all? Why not warn him to disappear?" "Maybe taking him in is part of the plan," Daniel answered. "Sometimes a public fall is worth more than a quiet escape." She shook her head slightly. "You're starting to sound like the conspiracy boards." "Rex went crazy when he saw him," Daniel said. "You ever seen that dog lose control?" Lisa considered that, then sighed. "Dogs pick up on things we don't. Fear, adrenaline, whatever he's hiding. It doesn't mean there's a grand design behind this." "Maybe not," Daniel said. "But the files don't line up. Old cases with loose ends, timelines shifted, a suspect who acts like he's been waiting for his own arrest. At some point, it stops feeling like coincidence." Lisa placed the folder she was carrying on the table. "These are the updated financials from this morning. Orders from upstairs are clear. Focus on the statement we can put together by tomorrow afternoon. Clean narrative, clean numbers. They want this case to be bulletproof in front of the cameras." "And if it's not bulletproof behind the cameras?" he asked. "Then that's above our clearance," she said, tone neutral. "Look, Daniel, you're good at what you do. Don't pick a fight with the entire building unless you're sure there's something there." She walked out, leaving him alone with the boxes and his thoughts. The hum of the overhead lights filled the silence. Daniel opened the new folder and flipped through the neat graphs and summaries. The story they told was clear. A powerful man cornered by a meticulous investigation, brought down by evidence and perseverance. It was a good story. It just didn't quite match the one written in the margins of the older reports, in the anonymous calls, in the unexplained gaps, and in the way a seasoned police dog had reacted when the supposed ending finally arrived. That night, when the building had emptied enough that footsteps no longer echoed constantly in the hall, Daniel stopped by the kennels before heading home. Rex stood as soon as he heard the familiar steps, tail moving once, then stopping as if he remembered the man from the warehouse. Daniel knelt outside the cage, fingers wrapping around the metal bars. Rex stepped closer, pressing his muzzle against the gap, warm breath on Daniel's hand. "You knew something," Daniel said quietly. "Didn't you?" Rex's eyes held the same fixed intensity they had in the warehouse, only tempered now by confinement and fatigue. He let out a low, almost inaudible sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. It was the sound of a partner who had done his job and was waiting for the human half of the team to catch up. Daniel stayed there longer than he meant to. When he finally stood, he had made a decision, the kind that didn't fit neatly into any report. Tomorrow, the cameras would capture the official version of events, but before that happened, he was going to find out why the files didn't match, and why, when a mob boss raised his hands to surrender, a police dog had acted like the real threat was still out of sight. By morning, the building had turned into a stage. Cables snaked across the lobby floor. Cameras were mounted on tripods, and a temporary podium stood in front of the agency's seal. Outside, news vans lined the street, satellite dishes raised like metal flowers, straining toward the sky. The city had woken up to the headline before Daniel had even left his apartment. "Major mob boss taken down in night raid." He watched the preparations from the balcony one floor up. A paper badge clipped to his suit, Rex's absence at his side feeling heavier than usual. The dog was still in the kennels, cleared by the vet, but flagged for behavioral observation after the previous night's outburst. Someone had logged a note that he should not be brought near the suspect during public events. Optics. "Agent Cole," a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Deputy Director Alan Pierce, a man whose presence usually lived inside memos and email signatures, not hallways. Pierce wore an immaculate dark suit, his grey hair combed back in a way that spoke of discipline, not vanity. 2 aides followed him, each carrying tablets and folders like mobile extensions of his will. "Sir," Daniel said, straightening instinctively. "You were point on the warehouse operation," Pierce said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Excellent work," Pierce replied. "Clean entry, no casualties, high-value target in custody. Exactly the kind of thing we like people to see when they turn on the news." "Thank you, sir." Pierce stepped closer to the railing and looked down at the controlled chaos below. "Today is important," he continued. "Not just for this office, but for the narrative it allows us to confirm. Organized crime is not untouchable. Law enforcement is effective. The system works." Daniel followed his gaze. "With respect, sir, the system still has a lot of unanswered questions in this case." Pierce's eyes shifted back to him, sharp and mildly amused. "Questions are good, Agent Cole. They keep us from getting complacent. But there is a time for questions and a time for answers. Today is for answers." "I've been reviewing older files tied to Moretti," Daniel said. "There are inconsistencies, cases that were folded into this one without clear resolutions, timeline shifts, accelerated orders. It looks like someone might have been cooperating," Pierce finished calmly. "Yes, that's exactly what it looks like." Daniel paused. "You're saying we had a deal with him?" "I'm saying," Pierce replied, lowering his voice, "that high-level investigations are rarely as simple as good men chasing bad men until one side wins. There are channels, understandings, compromises. People like Moretti function as both problems and tools. For a long time, he was more useful as the latter." "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now he's more useful as the former," Pierce said. "We didn't accelerate the operation to save him. We did it to close a chapter while we still control how it's written." Daniel thought of the dissolved shell companies, the transferred assets, the anonymous call from years ago. "So we let him clean house before we moved?" We allowed a controlled burn, Pierce said. Would you rather we brought down an operation we only half understood and left a dozen splinter groups fighting over the ashes in the streets? Sometimes you let the structure collapse inward instead of outward. That's not in any of the reports, Daniel said. Pierce smiled faintly. It's not meant to be. You did your job, Agent Cole. You followed the warrant, executed the plan, brought in the target. Leave the architectural decisions to those who sign different kinds of paperwork. And Rex? Daniel asked, before he could stop himself. The dog knew something was wrong the second he saw Moretti. A dog reacted to a dangerous man, Pierce said. That's what we trained him for. Don't build a grand theory on an animal's instincts. The words were dismissive, but something in Pierce's gaze suggested he'd weighed the detail more carefully than he let on. He glanced at his watch. I'll need you on the stage, he said. Front row with the rest of the arrest team. Cameras like faces they can put with headlines. Wear the look of a man who believes in what he did. It makes everyone's job easier. He turned and walked away, his aides in tow. Daniel remained at the railing a moment longer, processing the conversation. A controlled burn, a useful tool, a chapter closed. Downstairs, technicians clipped microphones to the podium. Upstairs, behind reinforced doors, Vincent Moretti waited in a secure interview room, drinking water from a plastic cup, apparently unbothered by the schedule being built around his downfall. Daniel left the balcony and headed for the kennel. Rex was awake, standing as soon as he heard the door open. This time there was no pacing, no frantic barking, just a sharp, alert focus that landed on Daniel and didn't waver. The handler on duty nodded. He's been calmer, the man said. Vitals are normal. Behavior's steady as long as we keep him away from the detention wing. So he reacts to that floor, Daniel said. He reacts to something on that floor, the handler corrected. You want to walk him? I'll sign him out. Just don't take him anywhere Pierce can see during showtime. Minutes later, Daniel and Rex moved through a side corridor, away from the main flow of staff and media. The dog's steps were steady, controlled, no tension on the leash, no sign of last night's frenzy, until they turned a corner that led toward the secure elevators. Rex stopped. His body stiffened, ears pricked, nose working the air. A low vibration started in his chest, not yet a growl, but already too focused to ignore. Daniel followed the line of his gaze. The elevator doors at the end of the hall were closed, a keycard reader glowing quietly beside them. Easy, Daniel murmured, feeling the leash grow tight. He's 2 floors up. You can't smell him from here. But Rex wasn't staring at the doors. His attention had locked on a narrow service corridor to the right, a hallway Daniel had never paid much attention to. No sign, just a plain door with a small metal plate and a keypad. Rex took a step toward it, then another, pulling despite the order to heel. "Hey!" a voice called from behind them. "You're not supposed to be down here with him right now." Daniel turned to see Officer Ramirez, part of building security, walking toward them with a clipboard in hand. "Just giving him a quiet walk," Daniel said. "Crowds downstairs are a bit much." "Yeah, well, this section's on restricted access during high-profile detentions," Ramirez said. "Orders from upstairs. We keep the path between the holding floor and the underground garage clear." "Underground garage," Daniel repeated. "For transfers," Ramirez replied. "If they need to move the big guy without putting him on display. Didn't they send you the memo?" Rex's growl rose, directed now fully at the unmarked door. The sound made Ramirez glance at the dog, then at Daniel. "What's his problem?" Ramirez asked. "He doesn't like something behind that door," Daniel said. Ramirez snorted. "Behind that door is just logistics, storage, service access, maybe a couple of guys watching monitors. He's probably picking up cleaning chemicals or something." "Who has access?" Daniel pressed. Same people who always do, Ramirez replied. Ops, senior staff. People with the right clearance. Look, if you're going to walk him, take him back toward the training yard. I can't have you and Lassie here scaring everyone who's trying to do their job. Daniel forced Rex to turn, the dog resisting for several steps before finally yielding, though his head twisted back toward the service corridor until they turned out of sight. Even then, his ears stayed angled in that direction, as if waiting for a sound only he could hear.